This keyboard that I found a while ago is actually very interesting from a technical standpoint. It doesn't have any branding on it here, but it does have this URL on the circuit board on the inside. I would recommend not going to this URL as it is not using HTTPS encrypted standard, and I would make sure that if you do visit this URL that you would ensure that your browser is redirecting to the SSL certified URL. But anyway, as I said, there's no branding on the outside of it at all, although it does boast very shamelessly of its teaching functions. Bass boost system, two-way speaker system, which to some of us is a two-way speaker system. Some of us know that as stereo. Now, first, right off the bat, what you can notice here, I have done some modifications already, but it has 4-note polyphony. Actually, it has... That's a lot of notes. It has a lot of polyphony for a pretty cheap keyboard like this, and that's really interesting. A lot of the times maybe you'll see 2-note polyphony, at the maximum maybe 3 or 4 so that people can play chords. But this one, I think it might actually have full octave, like 120-note polyphony, which is actually a pretty remarkable achievement for a little toy keyboard like this. And it's almost like SK Toys here was kind of flexing on a lot of other toy keyboard manufacturers by doing this. Just and it's interesting, they only have the branding on the inside, so this is kind of a funny thing to me, because if a bootlegger is trying to reverse engineer this keyboard to make a clone of it, they will be the ones that actually see the branding of who made this toy. So it's kind of like SK Toys is being like, hey, bootleggers, we did a really good job with this keyboard. I bet you are wondering how we did it. Well, we did it by being really good at what we do. It's very snarky. For my purposes, I'm not really interested in these different fingering options. But the other way that SK Toys really flexed on a lot of other toy makers at the time, besides the massive amount of polyphony that they were able to fit into this, and I'll get into how they did it in a little bit, but this thing actually has, if you look down here, there's different chords, and this is something that you would have on pretty higher end keyboards. You would have your chords down here, so you could select between the chords and play chords down here and play a melody up here. So that's something else that they added, and they I'm surprised they didn't even just throw an arpeggiator in here as well. But when you have the beat going, there's certain beats that actually have a bass line to them as well. And yeah, 100 rhythms, that's pretty good. 100 tones, that's a lot to pack in. And if you look in here, all of this over here is just amplification circuitry centered around this op amp right there. So this is not really doing anything other than handling. It has a microphone input and an MP3 player input, and then it has a DC jack that, a space for a DC jack if it was a model that had a DC jack. This one doesn't, which is why I added my own here. And then this is just the controller for the buttons and the keyboard, which is pretty boring stuff. And then here we actually have a pretty robust power regulator like circuitry here to make sure that, and that's why I was able to actually, I'm just running a 9-volt DC, even though that this was originally, it takes 4 AA batteries. But, I saw this power regulation that they have going on here, and I saw some other things, and I was like, oh, this will run just fine off 9 volts. If anything, running it off 9 volts will just give a bit of a boost to the amplification, make it a bit louder. So here we have the big secret, and it's just a black blob under there. And you'll see here I replaced the crystal with a 3 megahertz. I think it was originally something around, here it is, 14 some megahertz. But yes, usually when you're modding something, seeing a crystal like this, it's like, well, you're not going to get too interesting of glitches, because if there's a crystal, that crystal is basically driving microprocessor logic, in this case on this black blob in there. And when it comes to digital processing logic, like it, in some ways it's good because it doesn't glitch out as much. But if your intention is to try and reverse engineer something and get it to do something that it's not intended to do, you can't really do that. For example, there's no way to do a pitch bend on this unless I change the actual speed of the clock, which is dependent on this crystal and the crystal's resonant frequency. So I have it set to a very low crystal. So I can get really crappy bit crushed low notes. I don't know, maybe I'll just put a switch so that I can switch between that and the normal crystal. But it does appear also that this thing is true stereo, which is really cool. So all of that's being done in software on this tiny little computer right here, underneath that black blob. And that's all digital logic. So I'm sure they used a lot of really interesting software tricks that I kind of wish I knew. In order to get all these different features. But yeah, thanks for watching. Shout out to SK Toys. I hope that you guys are using an SSL certificate on your website now. But good flex. Like, this is pretty amazing.